We go. Welcome to Master Your Life, the show of insight, intelligence, and inspiration, where I ask you each week to consider who is it you are right now and where is it you would most love to be in your life. I'm host Leah Mattinson, and this week it's my absolute thrill and pleasure to welcome back to the show Dr. David Katz, and to welcome for the first time Mark Bittman. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Great to be with you, Leah. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Nice to be here.
Wonderful. And so what we're here to talk about is the release of your brand new publication, your brand new book, What to Eat. And it's such a fun book, really. I think it's interesting, having been in health for so many years myself, that it amazes me the questions that people really honestly still have about what is okay to eat. And so I just want to do a little introduction about you guys, but anyone who is interested in this fundamental question and has been confused by it for any span of time, please stick around for the entire episode, or at least watch the replay so that you can actually get this very scientifically well-researched book, and that you can figure out how to connect with both Mark and Dr. Katz. So what we're going to talk about is, what is the best diet? Do calories matter? And when it comes to protein, fat, and carbs, which ones are good and which ones are bad? Mark Bittman and health expert David Katz answer all these questions and more in a lively and easy to read question and answer format book. This is such a great format, guys. Loved it. And inspired by their viral hit article on Grub Street, one of New York Magazine's most popular and most shared articles, Bitman and Katz share their clear, no-nonsense perspective on food and diet, answering questions covering everything from basic nutrients to superfoods to fad diets. God, Lord knows there's so many of those, right, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are. And so the topics we're going to talk about today are in the book, included dietary patterns, just what should humans eat? Grains, aren't these just carbs? Do I need to avoid gluten? How about meat and dairy? Does grass-fed matter? Ooh, the big burning question, alcohol. Is drinking wine actually good for me? And more. So throughout this book, Bitman and Katz filter the science of diet and nutrition through a lens of common sense, delivering straightforward advice with a healthy dose of wit. So thank you, gentlemen. Just so excited to talk about this with you today. And I want to mention to the listening audience, because they can't see you unless they're watching this on YouTube, is that you guys have been around the block a little while. You're both of you over 50 by a little bit. And so, and you've got children. So the basis of this book isn't just that you're both intellectual giants, that you're, wonderful writers, that you've got science, degrees, and check all the letters out, everybody behind their names, because there's lots there. But really that this is a home matter as well. You're both fathers. And so it's not just a matter of that this is something that you've, researched and studied. You've lived it in your own lives, which I think gives this a scope of more credibility than most things on the marketplace. So let's just start out with the most fun question I can think of, is where in the world did the idea for the first article come from that was mentioned in New York Magazine, Grub Street?
I'll handle that. David and I had been corresponding for years and had met a couple times, and I had been writing for Grub Street and thought that a sensible nutrition primer would be of some use. And there's just so much nonsense out there. And David has such a clear way of putting things and such a well-grounded understanding of nutrition that I thought, let's just address some of this crazy stuff that people are asking all the time. So our editor was into it. We solicited a zillion questions from different people, and then we tackled answering them. As you said, it was a really, really popular piece. And we thought one thing that was missing was a brilliant essay that we had written to lead off the piece. So we decided to use that as the foundation of a book. So that's how we wrote How to Eat.
And yeah, Leah. So, well, first of all, it was a pleasure collaborating with Mark on the essay. And I think part of the basis for us doing the book together, by the way, it's How to Eat. We threw you a curveball. We said, we were asking about the title in the UK. It's How to Eat, not What to Eat, although it covers both. But, because we both really enjoyed the collaboration. So, for those who read, and the funny thing about the essays in New York Magazine was the first one was called The Last Conversation You'll Ever Need to Have About Diet and Health. And so inevitably there was then a sequel because the first was really popular. So the last conversation wasn't the last conversation. It was the second to last conversation. And then it wasn't even that.
That would have been a great title.
The second to last conversation. Anyway, so, we really enjoyed it because, we have such a different set of experiences in the world of food. And Mark is an expert cook, wrote, the classic best-selling How to Cook Everything. I mean, everybody's got a copy of that. Everybody who knows how to cook, Mark's on the short list of people they credit. So, from that perspective, appreciation for great cuisine and a really deep understanding of food systems. And that's not my wheelhouse. I know a lot about the effects of food on health and dietary patterns. So, we just found that putting it together, it was really great. I mean, each of us, I'd ask a question, he'd answer, he'd ask a question, I would answer. And then that vibe kind of populated those essays and they did really well. So again, among the more popular columns that New York Magazine had ever done, and we knew we had more to say. So, the book kind of just grew out of that. We just decided to continue the conversation.
Yeah, and it's an important conversation. What's the very first question that you think has the biggest impact, the most asked question of all time?
I don't know if there is a most asked question, but Mark and I, we were doing interviews in New York a week or so ago for the book. Mm-hmm. And was it NPR, Mark? We were at, what's the single biggest news about diet that you want to share? And my answer was that there is no news about diet, and you endorsed that. So I don't know if that's the most asked question, but what is the most important news about diet? I think the two of us would agree that there is no news about diet because the best diets around the world are diets that are rooted in heritage and culture that have been making people healthy and vital, that have been sustainable across generations. And, I think, I don't know if that helps you sell a book to tell people that the news is there is no news, but, frankly, that's the reality. And, that's the kind, when we talk about the book being rooted in sense, I'm a scientist. I've made my career that way. I've run randomized trials and published meta-analyses and all of that. And there's a lot of detail still to learn about diet and foods and nutrients. And, I've been involved in that. But you kind of step back and look from altitude. The most important thing that really is likely to change years in your life and life in your years, it's the overall dietary pattern, built out of fundamentals. And I think, Mark, that would be my answer. The most important question is what's the important news about diet? That there is no news. There isn't going to be important news tomorrow. If you just got those fundamentals right that have stood the test of time, you'd be fine. But I don't know. What's your thinking, Mark?
I mean, I think I agree. I think the one thing I've been saying is that you already know what a good diet is. And when we say a good diet, the images that come to your mind, the images that come to almost anybody's mind, are likely to be the right images. Diet that's low in junk food, ultra processed food, low in animal products, high in plants, and so on. That's what people think. So in a way, the book is, we address the minutia of what that means, and we address questions like, as you said, is alcohol good for you? How much coffee should I drink? How many whole grains should I eat? And so on. Those questions are worth asking and worth answering. But the big picture, it can basically be summed up in a sentence, and it usually is. And it's just that people have trouble believing it. It's in a way it's too simple. In a way, the truth is attacked by people who have a vested interest in making money and confusing us.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Right before we went to recording, I was telling David that I had interviewed somebody yesterday talking about neurology, because in our family we have Huntington's disease, so I have a special interest in neurological health, and interviewing this fellow talking about when they do brain mapping now. He's been in the business for about 30 years. And what they saw 30 years ago was that almost nobody had OCD, and now almost everybody has it. So and the reason for that is lifestyle and tablet use. So when you kind of couple what you guys are talking about in the book with the understanding that a lot of what we're influenced by is this little guy right here, your phone, that when we're making decisions about what we put into our mouth, a lot of it is happening via devices, and via the ease of getting food from all over the place. So do you guys talk about that in your book, or what are your thoughts on that? The change from people actually, is there a noticeable change in people cooking their own food and preparing their own food or ordering out?
Well, that change is not new. You know, I don't mean to take issue with you, but I think thinking that the phone has reorganized the way we order food is not, I don't know that that's true. We could order food by telephone before, now we can do it online. I don't know that that's such a big deal. We could always eat in restaurants, and we do eat half of our meals outside of the home at this point, and increasingly we eat junk food when we eat at home. So those are the big effects, and those effects have started before World War II and have only accelerated since, and they're largely a result of a kind of agriculture that grows food that's best suited to produce junk food. So therefore, that's what there is to be sold, and that's what we wind up eating. Yes, maybe it's become a little bit easier to get it, but as David Kessler, who's our former commissioner of the Food and Drug Association, always says, we live in a food carnival. This kind of food that's not good for us is basically what's available everywhere all the time.
Right. And maybe my point more so, Mark, was that we're inundated with marketing all the time.
And so, yeah, Leah, I wanted to react to that. So, yeah, I mean, when it comes to sourcing food and all, I generally defer to Mark. I basically agree. We've been eating outside the home for a long time. We're eating maybe more and more outside the home. Where I think the technology makes the biggest difference, and I think actually this does relate to mental health and OCD and choice paralysis and perpetual confusion, is not so much that it's the technology has specifically altered our relationship with junk food, but it's definitely altered our relationship with junk food for thought, because now everybody with an opinion, and no matter how unsubstantiated, can broadcast it out to the entire world. So we basically are cooking up opinion stew all the time, and it isn't necessarily the most credible voice that gets the most attention. It's the most wildly titillating voice. It's the most provocative, the most iconoclastic. And Bertrand Russell famously said, the whole thing wrong with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so sure, and wiser people so full of doubts. That's a huge problem when it comes to understanding things fundamental to health, because, we cover all of this in the book, but, one of the things Mark and I do is we tell you when we're not sure, dairy good or bad. Well, if you talk to a zealot, someone will tell you why it's absolutely the worst thing, and someone will tell you why you absolutely need to have it 4 times a day. And we shrug our shoulders and say, it depends. Because that's the truth. I mean, it could be good for you if you're having dairy instead of Coca-Cola. It could be bad for you if you're eating cheese instead of broccoli. It depends. So the stuff that is broadcast via those little devices and that constantly clamors for our attention makes it seem as if no two experts agree, because a lot of the people broadcasting their opinion aren't expert in the first place, but it's hard to tell. And then with ever tighter news cycles, there's a constant feeding frenzy for, what is the most provocative thing we can say. And Lord knows the one thing we don't want to do is give people the same advice for 2 days in a row, because how boring would that be? I mean, we've got to tell them something different today from what we told them yesterday, so they'll tune in tomorrow.
Right. What happens if the news doesn't change?
Yeah, that it isn't news. And the reality is that, in our world where we care about food for health and longevity and vitality and sustainability, it doesn't change with every study. It doesn't change with every news cycle. It doesn't change across generations. But geez, where's the profit in that? And so those little devices are constantly spewing misinformation. And our uptake of that, again, maybe it hasn't massively influenced how often we eat outside the home or how much junk we eat, but our uptake of junk food for thought has gone up exponentially. And that's a huge problem.
And so do you think that by people Hello? I was worried about the grandkids coming in.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Oops.
That's okay. And that's about as real as it gets, folks. So, and was that a actual dog or was that a sound over?
No, I've got real dogs in the background. I'm on mute until you ask me the next question because they're still at it.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah. So I guess like, when you guys were doing the research for the book, and you've been in food on both sides of the equation for a lot of years now, you say no, there's no new news. What's the news that people, if they were starting from ground zero and just went, wow, I'm so confused about what I ought to do. What's a ground zero kind of statement that somebody could write down in a journal and go, start here? Point one, start here.
I mean, there's many different ways to say this, but a couple of things, and we'll say it in different ways, but a couple of things to say is that any traditional diet is better than any contemporary diet. So if you look at the way people ate before, say, 1950, all of that is better than the way that big food would have you eat now. Another way to say it is, as Michael Pollan very famously said, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And when he said eat food, he means eat real food. We all know what that means. Mm-hmm. And another way might be to say, I mean, this is arbitrary, but if you ate 30 or 40% fruits and vegetables and 30 or 40% legumes and whole grains and 20 or 30% of everything else, but keeping that first conversation in mind, you're all set. And anything more specific than that is specific, although there's nothing wrong with specificity, it's just not really necessary.
Sure. So when people are starting out that are, let's say if somebody has a extreme overweight problem, well, maybe not even extreme, 20, 30 pounds overweight, and maybe they've got some, brain fog or something that goes along with having that weight, then can one of you speak to what food does metabolically to actually create what I'll term as brain fog? You guys might have a better. If so, is there a couple of days of time when you're moving back to a more pre-50s nutrition that you might need to be mindful that you might be a little bit moody when you're coming off all this other stuff? Or does your body just kind of...
Leah, you froze there for me for just a second. I've got you back now. I mean, if you're asking metabolic questions or brain fog, I think we're in my wheelhouse. So just to append to what Mark was saying before, I think there are a number of ways to characterize what's true from altitude. I love Mark's versions. I can get a little more detailed and say, mostly we ought to be eating some balanced assembly of whole, minimally processed vegetables, fruits, grains, beans, lentils, nuts, and seeds, plain water when thirsty. But I think what it all comes back to, and this is really important, and in the book we have a whole section devoted to nutrients. We get into all of that, but we keep coming back to the fact that if you get the foods right, the nutrients take care of themselves. Mm-hmm. One of the things we clearly get wrong is this fixation on, is it all about sugar? Is it all about saturated fat? Is it all about gluten or lectins? And you can pick any ingredient or any component or any nutrient, fixate on that, and get the diet wildly wrong. Whereas if you get the diet fundamentally right, all of the nutrients are sorted out. So, getting the focus on wholesome foods in a sensible, balanced, and generally time-honored assembly, that's crucial. You know, in terms of metabolic effects, so I think you're asking in two different directions. You know, first, let's just put it in the simplest of terms. Our bodies are extraordinary, sophisticated, remarkable machines. Food is the fuel, period. It's the one and only fuel. It runs everything. So, I mean, we don't have to ask more questions about, does it affect my eyesight? Yes. Does it affect my hair? Yes. My heart, my liver, my kidneys, my spleen, yeah, everything's connected. Food is the fuel. Whoops. Balance. Yeah. All that. And then, so sure, it'll affect, you know, cognition and affect and mood stability and everything. And it just stands to reason. And by the way, it's really more than fuel, because you put fuel in a car, for example, whatever the fuel may be, and the car or the engine burns the fuel, but it doesn't reconstitute the car. In our case, we're not just burning the fuel. You know, we're turning over hundreds of millions of cells every day. We're using up enzymes and hormones every day. They have to be replaced every day. Food is the construction material. We see that more vividly with children, because food is literally the construction material as they grow in size. But, you know, we can think of the adult human body a little bit like a river. It's never the same 2 days in a row. It's constantly flowing, you know, and we have to resurface our skin. We have to resurface our gastrointestinal tract. We have to replenish hormones and enzymes. Food is the source. And if it's not a balanced source, it's like trying to build a house when you've got way too many bricks and not enough lumber, or way too much lumber and not enough roofing shingles. You know, you just can't put it together right. So food is exactly all of that. So yeah, it'll affect brain fog and everything else. In terms of transitioning from bad to good,
yeah,
you know, I mean, if you're used to tons of caffeine and you try to go off it, you'll feel it at first. You'll have to kind of transition slowly if you want to avoid withdrawal symptoms. If you eat a diet that's massively high in sugar and you try to transition, your taste buds may rebel a little bit because everything will taste too bland. Similarly with salt or processed food in general. On the other hand, it doesn't take long to go through what I call taste bud rehab. You know, essentially to let your taste buds become more familiar with stuff that's actually good for you, and to learn to love foods that love you back. Absolutely doable, begins to happen within days, pretty robust within just a few weeks, and a tiny investment to make to have better diet, better health for the rest of your life.
Right. And maybe Mark can pick right up on that, because the taste bud rehab, I think, is also in his wheelhouse, just around the cooking and the palate, and why it's so much more fun to be able to taste the food that you're eating.
Well, you know, a lot of people say that kids won't eat food that they don't like, but the fact is that kids will like food that they eat. And if you feed it, we all know that taste preferences, food preferences,
that's a good one,
when we're young, and that the older we get, the harder it is to change it, but it still can be changed. And David's analogy of taste bud rehab is just spot on. If you start to eat better food, you'll start to like better food.
And I think
and there are studies that show that, Leah, by the way. I mean, you know, I've experienced it in patient care. I think parents have routinely experienced it. You know, little by little, you get your kids used to food they're reticent about, and they come around. But there are actually studies that show that people who have preferences for junk food and aversions to wholesome food, they'll completely flip. They do a 180. It takes 6 to 12 weeks.
Right. Yeah. And I can say that from personal experience, having gone through 100-pound weight loss myself 20 years ago, that I absolutely went through the same process. It was like not really tasting anything, and then all of a sudden everything tasting so much better. And because of that, eating much less. So there was, I mean, lots of, you know, the domino effect of all the wonderful things that happens. So I'm a proponent of that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good place to jump in. So, you know, at the beginning, you were queuing up all the stuff we talk about, and calories were on that list. Just quickly, and again, all this stuff that we do cover extensively in the book. But you know, another writer we both appreciate very much is Michael Moss. Michael's a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist. He's written great books. Salt, Sugar, Fat was a bestseller. Wrote a New York Times Magazine cover story, The Extraordinary Science of Addictive Junk Food. And this is a really crucial thing for people to understand. So, you know, essentially in that essay, what Michael describes is how big food manipulates the formulations of highly processed food to make it hyper palatable. In other words, directly stimulate the appetite center in the human brain so that the calories it takes to feel full are maximized, because after all, the more you eat, the more you buy, the better their profit margin. Okay, yeah, we all get, obesity and diabetes, but that's not their problem. So they laugh about it all the way to the bank. If you rehabilitate your taste buds, if you prioritize wholesome, minimally processed foods, among the many virtues of that, and there are many, you fill up on fewer calories reliably. And I imagine the maintenance of that very impressive weight loss, you can attribute to the fact that, no, I'm not hungry all the time. I just eat so much better. I fill up on the right number of calories now. I don't need to overeat calories to feel satisfied, which you absolutely will if you eat junk food. So the quality of your food sources has a massive influence on the quantity of calories it takes to feel satisfied every day.
Yes, and at that time, the big deal 20 years ago, or maybe a little bit longer now, I hate to date myself, but was, Diet Coke, low fat this, but Diet Coke, honestly, like, I'm a counselor by trade, you'd think I would know, right? But intelligent people, great people, savvy people who want to be desirable. I grew up on a farm, hardworking gal. You'd think I'd know this stuff. I didn't. Or the reason I ate was, personal trauma from childhood. So I was eating to cover up stuff that had gone on, which I think is the story for a lot of people. So one of the things that people can do by having some other information about how to get out of that is that you don't need to add on the insult that you do to your body by adding on all this extra food. There's ways of healing all that other stuff, but realizing lots of really smart people, really great people struggle with weight for a variety of reasons. And when you get out of the brain fog of wanting to feel great all the time, you have to kind of get out of that for a few days. So to your point, it doesn't take 8 weeks of, rigorous, sticking to a diet plan, which is, I think, what people think, that in order to lose weight, keep it off, you have to go to the gym, do punishing workouts, eat food you don't like, drink stuff out of a shaker cup, smoke, drink Red Bull. There's all these ways of getting weight off and feeling healthy that aren't pleasant, yet people spend, millions and trillions of dollars on that. And it in the landscape that I look out at, it's not working, because there's so many people that are struggling with not feeling good, with chronic disease. Can you guys speak to that a little bit?
Sensible weight loss and weight maintenance? Yeah. Mark, you want to jump in, or you want me to go?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, your experience, I think, is very much aligned with something called the National Weight Control Registry. This is the largest database in the world looking at people who've done what you've done, although most haven't done it as impressively as you, Leah, but who've lost at least 30 and kept it off for a span of at least several years. Because, losing weight in the short term, super easy, anything will work. And, way too much is made of, hey, this diet made me lose 32 pounds in 27 minutes. And all of that is hooey. There's all sorts of stuff you can do that's absolutely dreadful for you that will produce rapid weight loss, beginning with a cocaine binge, extending to a bout of cholera, chemotherapy for cancer. I mean, horrible stuff. I mean, the idea that losing weight fast is in any way aligned with good health is just silly. So you can lose weight sensibly and sustainably, or you can lose weight fast and silly and dangerous and at odds with health. And, sustainable is the way to go, because otherwise what you're doing is setting yourself up for rapid weight loss and equally rapid weight gain with interest. And then that just means you spend the rest of your life on enough diets, and you have a toxic relationship with food. You have a toxic relationship with your body. And our view, and again, this is where the power of our teamwork, because, again, expert cook in Mark, someone with a deep appreciation for great food, and I'm focused on health, but both matter. You want to get pleasure from good food, and you want to get pleasure from good health. And it's really by combining those two that you're now talking about, hey, I could do this for the rest of my life. Why wouldn't I do this for the rest of my life? So certainly all of the credible literature, the studies on weight loss favor approaches to diet and lifestyle that can stand the test of time. But and then I'll turn it over to you, Mark, for additional comments. But as a physician, one of the things I thought to ask my patients over the years is, why do you come to me? And inevitably it had something to do with wanting to be healthy. And then I would ask the unexpected question, why do you care about being healthy? Nobody even stops to think that deserves to be posed, but it does. I mean, health per se isn't the prize. The prize is, I want a good life. And all things being equal, healthy people have more fun. Well, then, if the reason for health, the reason we care about it is because it makes life better, then making life better is the prize. And good food is a big part of that. So I think there's an important balance to strike, and we really ought to be thinking about, loving diet and lifestyle that love us back, rather than I'm going to do something dreadful, onerous for 6 weeks, and then stop as soon as I can.
I mean, everybody knows that when you go on a diet, it means you're going to eat in a peculiar manner. Eating in a peculiar manner is not a sustainable way to eat. And really, again, we have to look at why this happened. And this has happened because there are more calories out there than we could possibly eat if we were eating normally.
Right.
And the profits that big food wants to make are not going to be made if we eat normally. So the calories are packed into foods that are little calorie bombs. And those are the foods that we're being encouraged to eat. They're available everywhere. They're inexpensive. And they have the power of marketing behind them. If you look at real food, again, we all know what that is. I mean, a tomato, a broccoli, a grain, a bean. If we know what real food is, you eat that stuff, it's not calorie bombs. It's got about the right amount of calories per volume. As you've both said, it will fill you up. You will learn to love it and so on. And that is a diet that's the way you eat for life. It's not a diet that you go on for 6 weeks. Eating real food for the rest of your life is the way to maintain health, as David has said 2 or 3 times already. Going on a diet is not a solution to health.
And the other thing, Leah, I think one of the great pleasures of food is the social component. And, people go on a diet and leave their families out of it. But
Yes.
But food has always been the centerpiece of family gatherings, and so I think it really subverts the great social value of food. I mean, what a pleasure to gather around a table of good food. But I don't think anybody gathers around the family diet, right? Now I'm on this diet, you're not, the kids aren't. I mean, it's isolating. And, our greatest strength is always a product of unity. I think one of the reasons diets are so prone to fail is the whole concept is I'll do me, you do you. And, I think we kind of get divided up, weakened, and conquered.
Yeah, I think that's so wise.
Diets do isolate themselves in a way.
Yeah.
So wise. And I lived this. 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I got my genetic status for Huntington's disease. And as a result of getting that piece of paper in my hand, it's a neurological disease, that I just went, well, how can I have a healthy brain? Which was a sensible question at the time, but catalyzed by the potential symptoms. I was a little bit, let's say, hyper about my approach. And I was on the ketogenic nutrition plan for 5 years with 100% compliancy. Now, my kids were 10 and 11 at that time.
That's amazing. I don't know anybody who's ever stuck it that long, by the way.
And it was stupid. So I'm just going to say why. I'll say why.
Yeah.
And I will, because my son, who's now 22, 23, says, I will never eat another piece of turkey bacon. And he would just do stuff that was embarrassing in Costco because he wanted me to buy normal food. He said, can't you just eat a scone like the rest of us, for God's sake, Mom? And it wasn't, it didn't embrace other people. It was horrible. It wasn't nice. It wasn't fun. And I wouldn't encourage anybody to live that rigorous a lifestyle. And your kids do pay. they pay because you're so checked out. And it seems like it's noble, but it's actually the opposite side. It's quite selfish. And so I'll say that because
yeah,
it's okay to say it. You know?
Yeah. Well, you're a remarkably disciplined person, Leah, that you were able to do it. A bad idea, though it may have been, just to adhere that way. But if I may, just to build on nobility, I mean, one of the other things Mark and I feel strongly about and write about is we've got to be thinking outside our own skin. So, you know, I mean,
Yes.
this is not, you know, it's not 1820, it's not 1920, it's 2020, and the planet is in critical condition. And, you know, we're burning down the Amazon to graze beef cattle to satisfy the world's appetite for meat. Even if keto were a good idea for your metabolic health, and we don't think it is, and there isn't evidence to suggest that it is, but even if it were, we'd have to say, can 8 billion hungry Homo sapiens eat in a way that is at odds with the viability of the only planet they're ever going to call home? And I mean, the answer is such an incontrovertible no. You've got to eat in a way that allows for the viability of your planet. People without a planet to call home don't tend to be very healthy. Right? There just are no healthy people on an uninhabitable planet, you know, period, full stop. So, you know, we talk a lot about, you know, the confluence of what's good for people and good for the planet. We're fortunate that, you know, most of what's true, everything we've been saying about the emphasis on minimally processed plant food. If you think of these two key axes, from animal food to plant food is good, and from highly processed to minimally or unprocessed is good. Well, both of those trajectories are also really good for the planet. You drink water instead of highly processed soda, you're actually using much less water. That's better for the aquifers, and on it goes.
Right.
But it's crucial to think about it. We can't talk about diet and health in 2020 and not be talking about the health of the planet as well as the people, because it's one thing.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And I think that most people or many people are swaying more towards that higher level thinking. I grew up on a farm in Alberta, Canada. We had, you know, grain farm. We had a full vegetable garden. We had apple trees. And we also had cattle, you know, but we weren't serving cattle to 8 million people. It was, you know, a very different environment, a different milieu. And at that time it made sense.
And mixed agriculture still can. Mark, maybe talk a little bit about, you know, sort of regenerative agriculture and kind of the whole locavore concept.
Yeah.
What's true is that we've gotten away as we've moved more and more toward commodity agriculture. We've gotten away from people growing food for themselves and their neighbors and their region, and we've gotten into it's well established now. We've gotten into a type of agriculture that's entirely cash based, where people grow crops that they then sell and use the money that they make to buy food. The food that's being sold, as I said before, is largely food that's commodity based and ultra processed, and it's just an entire cycle of agriculture feeding ultra processed food and ultra processed food demanding a different kind of agriculture. When you were growing up, there were still plenty of farmers who were growing a diverse landscape of crops. Now almost everyone is growing corn, soybeans, wheat, rice, and so on.
Yeah, it is so different. It's so different. And it's funny too, because we don't even appreciate the seasonal things that we used to have, you know, not that many decades ago. You know, when you got a Christmas orange, it was a Christmas orange. You were like, woo! It's like, or it was one little time, and it was like $30 for a box of 3, you know, but it was relative to how much it actually cost to get it over at that particular time. So the diversity of what was available, so the specialness of the palate also has changed a little bit, even in, you know, cooking and enjoying food, because everything is available all the time. When there was a little bit less availability, you really did treasure maybe a little bit more eating.
Well, and also to go back to what David said, when you think about what it takes to get grapes from Peru to I'm in Bermuda as we're doing this interview, and I went to the
I was
store,
wondering where you were.
and there are grapes, and the grapes are from Peru. And when you think, what could it possibly entail to get grapes from Peru to Bermuda? You're talking about two things. One is you're talking about there's no Bermuda onions in the store, and this is the time of year there should be. And two,
So because they've exported all the Bermuda onions?
petrochemicals that it takes to grow grapes and get them from Peru to here. And that's why some people have said since World War II, the kind of food that we're growing and eating could be called petro food because it is so fossil fuel dependent and so chemical dependent. The fertilizer is made from fossil fuel, the chemicals used to grow the food, pesticides are made from fossil fuel. Obviously, the transportation is involved, needs fossil fuel. The tractors that are used to harvest the crops, to plant the crops, are all fossil fuel driven. This is completely different from what agriculture was like 100 years ago, or what it would be like if it were anything approaching sustainable.
Yeah, or even 30 years ago. So agriculture has really exploded over the last 30 years. Yeah, gone from family farms to being massively owned operations. So there was still the small farm occasionally around, at least here where I live. I'm not sure what your experience is. I know that friends that I've interviewed for the podcast who have taken back family land or have become organic farmers really did so in the direction of trying to do exactly what you guys are encouraging people to do, which is to take back your health by starting to grow your own stuff and starting to be responsible for what you're putting in your mouth and trying to, be a little bit better steward of the land. Maybe you guys could talk a little bit about that.
Well, all this is part of the same story. So, I mean, it's
yes.
When we talk about how to eat,
Mm-hmm.
It is a prescription for individual health. It's a prescription for lifelong pleasure, for engagement with family and friends because of the social component, for kinder, gentler treatment of our fellow creatures. I mean, nothing is more abusive than factory farming, for better stewardship of the land. I mean, the beauty of this, and we're lucky, it's all one thing. I mean, it could be that physiologically, human beings, Homo sapiens, did best by eating just X. And X could be calamitous for the planet when there are 8 billion Homo sapiens, but now we're in a bind because there are 8 billion of us, and we can either eat what's good for us and destroy the planet, or take care of the planet, but it's less good for us. That would be a terrible dilemma. We don't have that dilemma. Mm-hmm. Everything that is best for our health is better for the soil, is better for the water, is better for the climate, is better for the Amazon, is better for Borneo, is better for our families, and and is completely compatible with these heritage-based, time-honored dietary patterns that are delightful and pleasurable into the bargain. We're fortunate that we have that confluence. And then I think that there's also an opportunity to decentralize control, and this is more your wheelhouse than mine, Mark, but with sort of local food production and regional food production, you're taking the power away from these concentrated, large, agribusinesses, and kind of re-empowering people who you actually might know. I mean, they actually be your neighbors, and and then first of all, you're not transporting nearly as much of what you eat over these great distances, but you also know a lot more about where your food is coming from. There's that, you kind of reestablish that connection. So all roads in this conversation lead back to the same basic set of conclusions, and we're fortunate that they do.
I mean, there's a way in which David talks a lot about sense and science, or using sense to understand science, and there's a way in which some of this is a little bit mysterious and a little bit maybe spiritual is the right word. It's a wonderful thing that what is good for us is good for the planet. It's not easily understood, and yet intuition tells us that this is really the way things are. And that's not a 21st century discovery. That's something that humans have known from before we were human. So
Right.
there's a way in which things have gotten too complicated, and it kind of goes back to where our conversation started. The answers to the questions about diet, the answers about how to eat are very, very simple. And we know what the answers are. We need to trust that, and we need to act on that. And if we did, it would bring about tremendous change, and all of it positive.
Yeah, amen. And so, Leah, in the book, we talk about the studies, and we cite the various contributions of research, but we keep going back to the future and saying, before we ever even invented the randomized control trial, we knew what to eat. We can't use modern science as an excuse for not knowing what to eat, because this study says eggs are good and this study says eggs are bad. Yeah, that's because of the way we designed the studies. Eggs are good compared to donuts and bad compared to still cut oats, and you could get whatever answer you want depending on how you design the study. But we kind of knew what was good to eat in general before we invented science. The science should be used to populate the gaps in what we know, not to throw out the baby with the bathwater with every news cycle. And that's a really important point. And it kind of emerged from the back and forth that Mark had in those essays we did for Grub Street, and then, in working on the book. Yeah, I mean, so much of what we ultimately conclude, we could have concluded before we had ever invented these research methods that have confused everybody so much. We're doing something wrong with science. We're not interpreting it sensibly. One of the big problems is science does not generate studies that change everything we knew up until yesterday. Science basically produces incremental additions to what we knew up until yesterday, which we have to interpret in context. And the way we interact with the news doesn't encourage that, but that's the right way to use it.
Right, and validation of what we're doing is on the right track. Sometimes when we're feeling off track or whatever, science sometimes will add to that. They'll say, yes, that's the right direction to go. I love that you used intuition, Mark. I think that's a really important factor that people leave out a lot, because we think we can think our ways out of everything. Right? It's like, I can think my way out of this.
Rationalize our ways out of everything, but yeah.
Right, but we often think our way into and rationalize our way into a lot of stuff. So intuitively, when we get back to, we do know what's best for us. We do know what's best to eat. A part of the unwinding of things, I think, is getting some comfort from reading a book like yours that actually lets a person off the hook a little bit for going, oh yeah, okay, what I thought was right is right.
And by the way, I just happen to have one of these lying around. People are wondering what this little devil looks like.
Beautiful.
There it is.
So there it is, How to Eat. So how do people get their hands on a copy of this wonderful new release?
Well, thank you. We're excited about it. We're, by the way, we're #1 nutrition book in Amazon as we're having this conversation anyway. And we're excited about that. It should be in bookstores everywhere and all of the usual places online. Honestly, I think the easy thing to do, just Google Mark Bittman, and you'll land on his homepage, and it'll tell you just what to do. The book's there under books.
There it is. It is there. So, gentlemen, any final parting words of wisdom to the audience? Words of wisdom or wisdom.
What do you got, Mark?
I mean, I think we've said it all. It's simple. You know the answers already. It's a matter of execution in a way.
Yeah, and I would say, beware the magical promises that sound too good to be true. Lose weight effortlessly in 15 minutes. They are too good to be true. You know that. If it were a get-rich-quick scheme, you would not reach for your wallet. You'd walk away fast. We need to grow up. Honestly, we need to, maybe just treat health the way we treat wealth, as something that serious grown-ups take seriously. That would make a world of difference, because, we know what we need to know. We just don't put the knowledge to appropriate use because we keep waiting for pixie dust. There is no pixie dust.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. No gimmicks.
No silver bullet.
Yeah, no silver bullets. Is the best way to be well, the best way to be healthy, and to have a really fun life. So thank you, gentlemen, again for joining me today. It's always a pleasure. I just look forward to your next great work, because I know you guys are creative beings, and it's a constant evolution and joy to see what the heck you're all going to come up with next. Right? It's so much fun. But
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
When your brain's working and you're having a good time, there's nothing more fun. It's just so excellent. So again, encourage everybody, pick up your copy of the book. Really do check out drdavidkatz.com so you can find out more about David and his great work, because he's got lots of things in the world that we haven't talked about today that I wouldn't want you to miss out on. And of course, Mark Bittman. Mark, thanks again for joining me. Love you guys.
Thanks,
Thank
Leah.
you for all the great work in the world.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye for now.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.